Well, hi folks, here we have Patrick. I've been really excited about this for some days now, particularly given all the things that are going on right now, especially if you've been looking at the pages today with Irene's feedback from what I posted yesterday ahead of this. What a night it's going to be doing this and then doing the stuff together for Phil. Patrick and I go way back, and what I thought we'd maybe do is just start by Patrick introducing himself. So, Patrick, do you want to tell us a wee bit about your story, and then maybe fold into your MindStore credentials? Then we'll take it from there. Is that okay?
That's fine, Jack. First of all, I suppose thanks for having me on here. Like I said, the build up for the last couple of days, no pressure at all. But I suppose my story. Maybe I'll circle back to the very start. It shouldn't take too long.
Yeah.
But I'm 59 this year. I'll be 60 in October, and I was born in London in a convent for unmarried mothers, and I think it's relevant maybe to my story and when I met you and all that is the fact that when my mother got pregnant, my father didn't want to know and he did a runner, and I think we all know there's plenty of evidence now, right, that even in the womb and all that, the rejection and the pain of that. And yeah. I suppose my story then is that she had a nervous breakdown after I was born. So I never even had a hug from my mother for the first 3 or 4 months of my life. Wow. And she wasn't capable of looking after me. So my grandmother, who was 57 at the time, suffering from ulcers and lots of other illnesses in Ireland, decided that she was going to look after me. So I was delivered to her when I was 5 months old, and I'm so grateful, to her for having taken me in and for, showing me probably love and a degree of kindness and all that, because I'd have probably ended up in some institution and all that, and who knows? I mean, it could have worked out or whatever. Yeah. But so I was brought up in a council estate in a small little village, good old Catholic Ireland, and while I had an incredibly happy childhood and nothing but great memories and great friends, it was still a two-tier society. So I grew up that there was us and them, and the them were at the time the big farmers, the shopkeepers and all that. I can remember going to pick up my grandmother's pension in the post office. And basically there was a high counter that time. It wasn't self-service, but you go in and the woman would have the newspaper overhead. She'd look down like that and back up again. Yeah. Let him wait. But what that did is it gives, I suppose it gives you a sense of not being good enough, and the rejection building on and all that from it. So, and I was frequently told even by grandmother then that I was delicate and that I was, that I'd almost died when I was 3 months old and all that. And I was told that I had a bad chest, so that even on the hottest day of the year, I had to wear a vest, a white t-shirt and all that inside everything, right? And obviously this was building up to the point then as well that you think, well, maybe there is inherently something wrong with me. And it's funny because down through the years, if I ever, after periods of stress, even after our wedding, I wasn't able to go on the honeymoon, right? And it always hit me in the lungs, and it was a chest infection that I got. But I think when I maybe like I said, that I had a good childhood, but one incredible memory that came back to me when I started doing MindStore and when I started doing the tapping, and you introduced me to Roger Callahan at one stage, and it was very profound for me, and I think it's relevant here as well, is that I had a very distinct memory when I was about 4 to 5 years old, and my gran was very sick at the time. She was being treated for indigestion and she had ulcers and almost died, only for she changing the doctor. But it was a very profound memory that there was a woman that used to come in to look after us. Well, she was a neighbour, and she was come in. She was, a very kind person and all that. But my gran was down in her bedroom. She'd be most evenings like that, and you'd hear her moaning and all that. And in the estate that I grew up in, there was a family that, and they were lifelong friends, but their father was an alcoholic, and he used to beat him unmercifully. and on 2 occasions they were taken into care. And I remember one of these occasions is that this black van came out, right? And there was 2 people and they chasing these kids around the estate trying to catch them to take them away. And it was terrifying. Yeah. And the overriding memory that I got just from that is that as a 4 and 5-year-old, I was so scared that my grand was going to die and that I was going to end up taken away like those. So they leave mental scars. Yeah. And all that as well. So cut a long story short, I went to an all-boys secondary school then as well, which while it was fantastic, but it's only when you leave it that you find then, right? Jesus, I don't know how to communicate with the opposite sex or have proper conversations with girls and all that. Yeah. And what I found is I discovered drink was a great leveler, and it made me very articulate and it made me very funny and all that. Yeah. And I suppose I spend my late teens and early 20s drinking far too much and maybe spending a lot of my time and my life and all that in and out of pubs. And one of the first significant periods of my life then happened in it was August the 16th, 1987. I remember because it was Elvis Presley's 10th anniversary of his death. Yeah. And I was drunk and I went driving and I ran headlong into a woman with 2 kids. Oh, and it's such a profound memory and all that, right? And it was the first time I'd been in hospital and all that, but it was a major turning point in my life. And I realized then, right, that I was going to have to do something with my life. And so to me, that was moving into phase 2. So phase 1 was childhood. It was all these memories. You know, I don't. There's parts that I regret and all that, but you had to experience it. But phase 2 was okay. You need to wake up. I was a bit depressed after the accident and all that, right? I had, you know, I wasn't wearing a seatbelt, so I broke 7 teeth, and I did a lot of physical damage, yeah. And I felt very down for a while. But and I went working in London for 4 or 5 years, and I went in building sites. I was a bouncer in nightclubs, so I did the full gamut. Yeah. But I remember coming home. My grandmother died then in 1990 in the summer, and I remember coming home for the funeral and realizing that I wanted to come back to Ireland again, that I didn't want to basically spend the rest of my life in a big city and all that. And at that particular time, I had, you know, I was reading self-help materials. It was a little bit before I discovered MindStore and all that. And basically, I set up the company, and it was, you know, for the first couple of years and all that, right? It was okay, but it was, I started doing goal setting work. And I remember at this stage, maybe I had 5 or 6 guys working with me, and we went to our first MindStore in Galway. Galway. And I probably, you know, naturally leading on because you said you wanted to talk about MindStore and all that anyway. But that was pretty, I suppose it was profound for me as well, because it opened, no, I was determined before that I was going to make a go and all that, but it was just the fact that you start maybe goal setting, that you start exploring areas and all that, and I brought the team with me and all that, and we found it you know, extremely helpful and all that. And obviously we had I suppose I must have done 4 or 5 of those, and I'll show it to you again now. I remember going to Glasgow in September 1999 for the advanced course, and I think there was 4 or 5 of us went to that, and tracking back onto the health thing, because I remember then that I suppose a part, you know, okay, I'd been drinking too much it was my crutch as well, because when I started the company, I was doing 16, 17-hour days.
Yeah.
And the only outlet that I was allowing myself at the time was you go to the pub at night to be able to deal with that. So I had a big capacity for handling work and for handling stress. But from I suppose in 2004, I had some chest pains, and cut a long story short, I went in and I was diagnosed that I had a coronary blockage and I had a stent put in.
Yeah.
And that was a major wake up as well, because I at the time, you know, I'm in my mid 40s, you think you're going to live forever and all that, right? And it was a major wake up call. And again, after that, I was a bit depressed, but in February 2005, you did your first island course in Glasgow as well.
Yeah.
So I brought, I think it was 3 or 4 friends to that. And I was feeling a bit sorry for myself and all that, but I can remember there was a big crowd and all that, and I was sitting, you know, the way you make us sit with other people and all that, just to get us comfortable and all that. And I was sitting with this wonderful woman, and I was telling her my story and all that. And she turned around and she said, "Do you know what's missing from your life?" She said, "Gratitude." And she said, "I had a partner in his late 30s and he died from a heart attack." She said, "You got a second chance." And I remember going away from that day. And do you remember you sent us around the city and we were looking for, yeah. So in the morning I was going around the city and all I was seeing there was a poster for the Killers, right? And I said, "Jesus, that's what I have." And in the evening, we did another walk out, right? And after hearing that woman, and obviously your message from the day and everything, right? But I was seeing opportunity, and I was seeing everything was brighter and everything. So I think that we moved on, and I met you in Dublin afterwards, and at one of the events that you did up there. And we got talking, and do you remember I got you to come in and do an event for us in the company?
A fantastic, wonderful event. Remember it? Way down in West Coast. One of those West.
It was in Killarney.
Killarney, that's it. Yeah.
It was, and we had something like between 70 and 80 people at that. So we had our own employees and some of our customers.
I've got Laura with me too. We had a lovely time after we had finished. We went and did the whole Kerry thing, and everything was amazing.
Yeah. So that was special, and Gavin was there that time as well, and yeah, and remember just after that then that you I think that was sometime in April, and we launched a fantastic product that time. Basically it was a wireless alarm system that we got branded ourselves in a factory in Israel, and we did a dealership, and we launched a great business. Now there was, I think, the economic downturn in a couple of years and all that, it put a bit of a kibosh on that. Yeah. But it was moving on in major directions and all that. But another profound thing happened. We obviously kept in touch, and you were doing the Line in the Sand program. Remember that in Stuttgart?
Yeah, very much so.
And to me, that's still one of the best programs that I've ever done. I thought it was profound. The Day of Silence was just absolutely astonishing. And, you know, the people that were there, like Paul, I mean, I'm talking to Paul probably a couple of times a week still.
Fantastic.
Fog, you know, a lot of these guys and all that. And obviously Gavin, you know, is still in touch. Cool. So and again, you know, thank you for that, because it was very profound. And I think, you know, the one thing I would say, and I'm not buttering you up because I'm doing a conversation, is that you've been a really, really good facilitator, and just allowing things to come through just as it should do. I'm doing all the talking here, Jack. Maybe if you need to ask me questions or anything, but or if you want to take it in another direction, I suppose. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, I mean, I'm really great. I always just trust how this flows, but I'm really grateful for lots of reasons that you mentioned tapping and Roger Callahan. Mm-hmm. For people watching this, if you go back through the timeline to the previous videos we did in the live sessions, I do talk about Roger, and I talk about tapping, and in fact, I take you through a tapping process for the anxiety. That was because of the anxiety and fear that was rampant in the media, when COVID was really taking off. So I'm grateful for you doing that, for sharing that, because that will remind people, hopefully you're watching this, to go back and find that and to get the tapping going again. So I'm grateful for that. But what I'm particularly interested in is, I mean, I was ever so grateful for you trusting me to come into your company. And that was a very, I've got lots of these in-house courses, hundreds of them, but that's one that stands out for all sorts of reasons. And it was great to work with Gav. Gavin was a great member of the team, but for the time he was with us, still very friendly with him, as you are, which I'm grateful for. But it was special. And then what I'd been doing is, when I came across the keto thing, the low carb thing, I've been in my own journey with my lungs for 30 years. And so I've had to find a way of managing my health where the medical world didn't have a solution, other than giving you sort of drugs just because that's the model. But when I asked them about drugs, would they work for me? They said, well, no, but we'll give you them anyway, type of thing. And the drugs were highly toxic. So I'd always had to do my own thing. And so when I came across the whole thing about low carb, particularly keto, and I shall hear this, I'm quite keen to interview the lady who introduced me to it, because she's got an amazing story, a great MindStore member, and she introduced me to it in Glasgow. I then felt I had to tell the world because of the endless examples I've heard of, watched and stuff. I put thousands of hours into it, people reversing out of all sorts of conditions. And then out of the blue, you contacted me to explore some of that. Do you want to pick up on that? Because I think that's, I don't want to push, and I've been very careful about it on these live sessions, not to push, low carb or keto in case it frightens people off. I just don't want to. It's moved into a much bigger thing, but nevertheless, that's still in the background for me. Massive for me. But do you want to tell you a bit about that story and how that unfolded and where that got to? That would be really helpful.
Yeah, well, and as a little bit of background to that, Jack, because I've had what I think were, digestive issues progressively getting worse for the last 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
And for a finish, that it was a case of, like, in my 20s, I could eat and drink anything. And for, as you get older, it was, everything was triggering me.
Yeah.
And I got diagnosed, I did a gut permeability test, and I had leaky gut and the autoimmune reactions that caused and everything.
Yeah.
But of course, the advice, so I went vegetarian for 12 years, right?
As you do.
Because this was the way to do it, right? And I can honestly say, right, I never went the vegan route, but I can honestly say, right, I did it for 12 years. My wife did it with me, right? And personally, I never found that it improved my health, right? But you get a bit indoctrinated and all that, right? And when you buy into something, you say, Jesus, maybe there's something wrong with me, but this is okay, right?
Yeah.
And even up to, we'll say, the point where I reached out to you, just before I reached out to you last year, is I'd been seeing your posts and all that, and I have to say, you're never forceful or anything. You say, make your own mind up.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, right, I never went there. I'd been connected with you on Facebook for 2 years now, right? Yeah. And I'd be reading your posts and all that, and you'd suggested this was a great podcast, on with Paul Saladino and all that, and I never went there. And one of the reasons was because I was after reading Anthony Williams' book on the liver rescue, right? And I tried the celery for 3 months, and mother of Christ, right? That I had massive reactions and everything. But again, you said, well, I'm gonna stick through it. And even though that I was getting hives and inflammation and everything, I stuck with it until it went through. Now, at one stage, it actually did some good because of the fact, right, that I wasn't eating a lot of the other crap while I was doing it, right? So you can say that it was, but on reflection now, it was probably releasing loads of cytokines, and the lectins and everything were. But cut a long story short, I think it was about roughly this time last year, or it could have been maybe June. And I read the thing again, and I said, you know what? There was a little voice that said, you need to look at this, right?
Yeah.
And it was, I'll always remember, it was the Paul Saladino one with Gary Fetke. you know, discussing about Kellogg's and the history of nutrition.
Yes.
And mother of God, I was just blown away. That was the light bulb moment for me.
Yeah.
And I remember I listened to all the podcasts on Paul Saladino's, and I mean he's an out there guy, you know, and I like him, and I buy into what he's doing. Yeah. And I think it was fantastic. And I looked at some of Gary Fetke's and I looked at the low carb movement, and it just made absolute sense from where I was coming from.
Yeah.
And so I went keto, and I suppose maybe about 2 months, maybe about 6 weeks or 2 months after that, the weight started to drop off. Now, I didn't do it for a weight thing, but it started to drop off, and I started to feel fantastic.
Yeah.
And I remember sending you an email and said, Jack, thank you so much for this. You know, it's taken me so long, right? But thank you for this. And you came back and you very kindly offered to do a call with me just to give me some update, which I'm eternally grateful, because that was when you introduced me to Ivor. Or you introduced me to Ivor's materials and all that.
Yeah.
And he's a fellow Irishman and all that. I hadn't heard of him. No. And I went on and again was totally blown away. Yeah. But the relevance and the importance from my point of view was his promotion of the CAC scan.
Yeah.
And you know, that movie that we all watched there last week and all that, he had in his website, he had a shorter version of that. I think it was maybe when they were the pre-making of the movie and all that. So I looked at that, and I looked at the Widowmaker movie that they had financed and all that. And it just made so much sense to me. Now, at this stage, we were moving into October. And I genuinely had never felt better. I felt probably fitter than I had for the last 20 years.
Amazing.
And I went into my GP and I said, I want a CAC scan. And she said, yeah, okay. And he said, why? And I said, because I do. Look, I had a stent put in previously. And I just mentioned as well, Jack, right, that in March 2017, which has just gone 3 years ago, right, I had another angio because I had some symptoms and they just said that it was safer to do it. And the angio was totally clear. It was perfect, right? Or he said that there was 25% stenosis. This was 3 years ago now, right?
Yeah.
And this is very relevant, and we'll discuss it in a second. And basically, so my GP said, yeah, he booked me in for the CAC scan. I went in really thinking, right, that everything is good, it's going to be fine. And it came back at a reading of about 1150, which is very high.
Unbelievable.
But it was, most of that was in one artery. And the diagnosis was that if you've had a stent put in, maybe it skews it. So I genuinely wasn't worried, but the GP was, and he said, look, you better do an angio as well, just to check. And cut a long story short, because it was coming up to Christmas then, I didn't do the angio before, and I said, I'll wait till after Christmas and we'll do it. And it was booked for sometime in February. And I'll always remember it was the day before Valentine's, 13th of February, and I was in there at 7 in the morning, and I thought, this is a breeze, I'm going to be out of here again. And I know this cardiologist with 15 years, he's the guy that did the stent originally. And while I'm lying there, and he says, you know, do you have any symptoms? And I said, no, why? And he said, you sure? No symptoms. And I said, this doesn't sound good.
No.
And he said, I'll be out in a few minutes. And he came out and he said, it's not good. He said, you have a 95% blockage on one side of the stent. And he said, there's 75% on the other side. And he said, we can't stent it because it's at a major junction. He said, you're going to have to bypass surgery. And you need to stay in today. And we're going to get it done the next couple of days. And you can imagine trying to process this now. So I said, there's no way I'm staying in today anyway, right? So even though they tried hard. But cut a long story short, so in 3 years, right, I had gone from 0 to having a 95% blockage without zero symptoms, no symptoms whatsoever. Now, I think at some stage, I must have built up some collateral circulation as well to allow you to have that much of a blockage without it. But I mean, obviously, it was very serious at that stage. I had a serious problem accepting the fact that I needed open heart surgery. I got another opinion, Asim Malhotra, you know, that's being interviewed by Ivor and by Paul Saladino and all that. So I got a consultation with him, and because I trusted him and I heard him and all that, I sent him my scan results and everything, and he came back and he said, "You probably don't want to hear this," but he said, "The best course for you is to do the surgery." Wow. He said, "At this stage, you know, the diet and all that, you started it too late, and what's been happening with you isn't the result of your diet and all that. This has been going on with a few years." And I think that what I did that night after that is I went to the house in the right bank. I went into my boardroom, right? And I allowed the higher powers come in, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to hand it over to some other power. If I'm meant to do the surgery, I'll do it." And you know what? The peace and tranquility I had after that, I had no problem at all. And even during the surgery, and I have zero doubt that the reason I got through the surgery so quickly and so good, and that my fitness levels are back to, we'll say, probably better than they were before the surgery at this stage, is because of the diet that I've been doing before that. And because I was metabolically healthy. And now I'm convinced of it, and I think that the relevance of the 3 years then, and I asked it from my GP and all that, because I had, when I got the stent put in previously, it was all, you have to take statins and you have to take aspirin and you have to take all the medication, and I never took them.
Right.
And so from 2004 to 2017, I never took any medication, even though they were telling me all the time I'd have to do it, and there was no problems. And this was through some of the most stressful parts of my life with business and stuff going on. And you remember at that time that I had this stuff with Roger and all that. So all of a sudden in the last 3 years, right, when business has been great, right, and everything, something happened, right, to go from almost 0 to 95% stenosis, right? And I'm convinced now that what's happened is because of my diet and the heart-healthy diet that I've been on, the good brown bread and the cereals and all the good stuff.
You did
we're indoctrinated with the flora margarine, right, and all the bullshit and that crap, right? Is that I had slowly, I'd obviously been insulin resistant for years, and that I had been, even though it never showed up when I did the blood tests, my A1C was always pre-diabetic levels, but I think that I've been pre-diabetic for the last few years. And I think that the reason that I got that stenosis in the last 3 years is because that I was insulin resistant and that it was a buildup of pre-diabetes. And you know what, my GP isn't disagreeing with that. I mean, they can't answer it, but it's a case of, well, for the rest of your life now, right, you must take aspirin, you must take a high dose of statin, and and guess what? I'm taking nothing now, right? And when I came out of hospital, obviously I took what they gave me while I was there, including the food. You know, it was $3,000 a night. Obviously, the health insurance were paying for it, right? And you want to see the crap that they feed you there.
I know.
Yeah, but when I stopped, I was dizzy and stuff like that, right? And I had breathing problems. And when I stopped taking the beta blockers, within 3 or 4 days, the breathing problems that went. And I'm not taking the statin. And that's a choice that I made. I've listened to Malcolm Kendrick. I've listened to Asim Malhotra, all the guys, right, that are qualified. They're saying that there's no evidence for this, right? And I'm quite happy, right, that like 4 weeks to the day that I did the surgery, I was able to walk 6 kilometers over hills.
Fantastic.
And so look, that's just my story. And I suppose that if that can either inspire or if it can help other people, right, to maybe just look at the indoctrination. And like you said, I'd be very careful that I'm not telling people, or I'm not giving anybody medical advice, right?
Of course not.
No,
never have.
I'm just saying this has been my story, right? And I've been in there, and you know what? I was very glad to avail of the very talented surgeon that did the job for me when it had to go down. And the nurses and everything in the hospital, they were wonderful. They looked after me very well and all that. And if and at the time I had the car accident, I was very glad to be looked after in a hospital setting then, right? But we say that this notion that you need to take medication for the rest of your life to be healthy and all that, or you know, you have to eat our heart healthy diet and all that. I think I've chosen, you know, to take responsibility for my own health and all that, and I suppose on my own shoulders be that then.
Yeah, I mean, so many things I want to pick up on, because very often when I've listened to some of these great names in this movement, it is a movement, you know, there's doctors and professors and all sorts of specialists have piled in now, and they're doing their best to get the word out there, because it's right against the paradigm that's constantly pushed at us and pushed at them. You know, I don't blame any of them. I don't think there's a conspiracy. They're just caught up in this thinking pattern, and we all believed it. They believed it. But what I find interesting is very often I've heard stories kind of like this, but the guys were massively overweight and they had all this, they were obviously diabetic, you know, type 2. They were obviously, we now understand, metabolically challenged. That they were insulin resistant. We didn't know all of that stuff, but they were. And unless they were getting tested for this kind of thing, and even with the tests they were using, they wouldn't have been identified. And so what I find fascinating about it, because you've been in and out of my life, and you've been there at moments, like, you know, when we were doing that Line in the Sand retreat in Stuttgart with Klaus and stuff, that's a process I'm going through as well. I'm learning, I'm developing, I'm growing as part of a collaboration. These are profound moments when we've shared them, especially the first island and so on. But you never struck me as a guy who was unhealthy. You're looking at you just looked a healthy guy. I knew you were looking after yourself with what you were eating, because we talked about it. We were on the similar sort of paths because we believed it. And yet over time, all that so-called healthy, heart-healthy diet was in the background causing issues. And it's, from what we're gathering, it's been causing issues for everyone. But it's getting people to go and look at it. It seems to be the thing. And what I'm interested in for people watching is, you've been big enough. You know, you've been through this life-threatening scenario where they're more or less saying you need to stay in today and we need to get this operation done ASAP. You go and double check, which, you know, you go to the right sources that you're trusting, you listen to your intuition, you go for it. And then you realize that in their paradigm, they're going to load you up with more drugs. And did they recommend not only the drugs, but you intuitively knew, actually, I'm not going to take, because you've found by coincidence the right people supporting you, the specialists that do have a contrary view. Did they also recommend a particular type of diet, apart from, look, here's the drugs, but we want you to now, did they want you to go back on the whole grains, the low fat, or was that no longer being offered?
It was, I mean, as part of your release program from the hospital and all that, so you get a visit by nutritionist, sorry, right? Obviously, and of course, it's low fat, healthy whole grains, vegetable oils. You know, no, they're not pushing it down your throat or anything, but they're saying that this needs to be your regime, right? You know, you need to get exercise is very important and all that, right? Which it is, but you know, one of the takeouts that I'll say, and I was going to say it at the end of it anyway, right? I've discovered it myself, right? That exercise on its own, right? You will never, ever become metabolically healthy with exercise on its own.
Thanks for sharing that. That's massive for people to hear that. Yeah, absolutely.
And I had done it going back 3 or 4 years, right? I was cycling 20 or 30K 3 or 4 times a week. I was walking, I was hill walking, but I might have looked okay. Yeah. And I wasn't. Now, what I'd noticed is the muffin thing and the waist was starting a little bit. Yeah. But I still look pretty good. But it's like, as we've learned from these guys when we started listening, the tofies, you can be thin outside, but you can be fat inside. And I always remember going to an acupuncturist in 2006 when I was in a dreadful state. I mean, I looked fine and everything like that, but I felt like hell on earth.
Yeah.
And I did 10 lots of acupuncture, and he said, "You've got a fatty liver." And I remember mentioning to my GP, and is, "What's he on about, right? You know, what's a fatty liver, right?"
Yes.
You know, but you can look back on it now, right? And I'm not looking back with regret there's a little bit of anger there, right? That it's taken me this long to actually, you know, because you could say, and you know, I'm grateful that I have a resilient body because of what I did to it with drink, which is liquid sugar and all that, right? And all the food I put into it. So I'm grateful that I arrived at where I am now, right? In time to make a change and all that, and hopefully at some stage, and I'm passionate about it now because I'm telling everyone, right? Everyone that's working with me and all that, and all my friends, they've all gone and they've had their CAC scans at this stage.
Fantastic.
I think it's so important. It's
critical.
It's 200 quid it cost me. It's non-invasive and it took 10 minutes. Yeah. And it saved my life. There is zero doubt about that.
Yeah.
But sorry, I went off on a tangent again. So
no, these tangents are fantastic. They're absolutely fantastic. I mean, so I suppose the question I suspect people want me to ask you, and I think they would have heard that your recovery out of the open heart surgery seems impressive. I mean, you're going up mountains and 6-mile hikes and stuff 4 weeks afterwards. Very impressive. What is your diet now? What are you tending to do? Have you relaxed a little bit? Are you fairly rigid? I mean, if we can rewind as well, I mean, one of the things I remember you telling me when we talked prior to you seeking out Ivor, was that you were doing all the stuff that I did, the green drinks. You know, you bought the whole thing, didn't you? You were drinking the green drinks. Yeah. You were. I mean, I did all of that as well. And now I suspect now you would never go near a green drink.
Absolutely not. No,
you would never have celery.
Yeah, and never have celery. And you know, I was in Lidl yesterday, right? Yeah. And even Lidl has an organic section selling wheatgrass powder now, right? And it's that's like the taxi driver giving you the tip for the latest stocks and shares and all that, right? And I'm saying, but you go into work in the morning. All I had for breakfast is I had the Vitamix juicer, and you put the kale and you put all this stuff and the broccoli, and there was about 100 ingredients in it, and I had 1.5 liters of this crap that I take to. And that's all I had until I come home and I'd have dinner, and dinner then would be meat maybe once or twice a week, right? And then it tended to be chicken or white meat or something like that. And it was
cardboard chicken.
The broccoli and all the good stuff, right? Now, funnily enough, I haven't been into cereals for years and years, right? Yeah. Thankfully, because they just gave me IBS and I got bloated and all that after having, so they didn't agree. But I was brought up on my grandmother's brown bread. I mean, that was the staple diet. She made her own bread and all that, right? And so I ate that up to about a year ago. And I remember seeing some study by about 2 or 3 years ago, and of course he was totally discredited. And he had said that there's a direct relation between high grains, the healthy whole grains, and Alzheimer's. Yes. And everyone said that's total bullshit and all that, right? And of course now we understand that Alzheimer's, they're saying, is diabetes 3. Yeah. And there's and of course there is a big correlation between high carb. But coming back to what you're saying, so okay, the time we spoke that time, right? I had gone keto, and I got Ivor's book, which is a fantastic book. I can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah. Got to read it, guys.
No, I bought Ivor's book after. I'd bought a keto book, and I was doing those. So I was eating maybe the cheese and the cream, and I'd put the cream in the coffee and all that, and I'd felt so much better. But the cheese and the dairy weren't doing me any favors. And I remember after you'd recommend the Ivor, I got his book then, and he had mentioned that, and he did it in some podcast with somebody, and I think Paul Saladino said the same, right? And so I took the dairy out of it, right, and felt a lot better.
Good.
And I remember listening to an interview with Paul Saladino I had with Zofia Clemens from Paleomedicina in Hungary.
Yeah, yeah.
And that really resonated with me, right? So I did a consultation with her.
Oh, wow.
And an amazing person, yeah. And so her prognosis is basically fully carnivore.
Yeah.
And not just go fully carnivore, but it's four-legged animals, right? Not two-legged, or it swims, or if it's got two legs, don't eat it.
Yes.
And now you'd say at the start, right, you know, that's a bit repressive and all that, but you can have the eggs and all that, right? And occasionally, right, you'd have the odd carrot, and very rarely, to be honest, right, it's in the plate or something like that. But my wife knows now, and I think she's going this way. So come back to where my diet is, right? Obviously in the hospital, and at the start, when I was in there the first week, I was just eating the meat out of the thing and leaving the veg. And they were saying, you know, is there something wrong? And I said, no, it's fine. And they were bringing me the fries for breakfast. And I remember the cardiologist come in one morning then, and he said, what the hell is that? I said, that's a good healthy breakfast. And and he was giving out a little bit, like, you know, but and I suppose when I came home, because I had breathing troubles for maybe a week and all, and it was very distressing, actually.
Yes.
And again, once I stopped the medication, so I did another consultation with Sophia then, right? Because her partner is a cardiologist and all that as well. And she said, look, you need to come off the hospital diet as quick as possible, and you need to come off this medication, because that's what's giving you the breathing difficulties, right? And again, I'm not saying that's for everyone or anything like that. It made sense for me, but I was off that 3 or 4 days and my breathing was perfect.
Yeah, fantastic.
And this stuff I was dizzy anyway, because I've never had high blood pressure, and you're taking medication to lower your blood pressure even further. Why would you do that? So that every time I got up from sitting down, I had to actually put my hands on something to stop myself fainting. The diet now, right, is I'd be 90% carnivore.
Wow.
And so for breakfast, what I have is I might have scrambled egg, or I'd have 2 boiled eggs, and I mix those with, sometimes I'll use a little bit of butter. But what I buy now in one of the organic butchers is I buy the beef fat. So you get the beef dripping, and it tastes fabulous. And I use that for cooking all the time, right?
Same here.
And I've discovered that the Tesco sell it in Ireland. I think it's a Northern Ireland company. They do it. There's nitrate-free bacon. It's fabulous.
Got that.
And I have a couple of slices of that. Lunch, it might be a bowl of bone broth with some of the fat put into it. And for dinner, right, I might have liver maybe once or twice a week, because there's a lot of the vitamins and the nutrition that you get in that. And I can honestly say that three days a week, I have a good ribeye steak with loads of fat in it, and I just love it. And
can I say though, for the guys who might be getting a bit challenged here, that you can still do all these protocols as a vegan, as a vegetarian, as a pescatarian. It's a wide church here, guys. But when you do, once you wander into it and you reverse, it's a complete 360 degree. Both you and I have gone from 12 years of vegetarianism to mostly carnivore. It's completely opposite. And we're not the only people. Lots of people do that journey. And it's only because I find that when you follow this through, for some reason, a lot of us end up experimenting with carnivore. You don't have to, but I think a lot of us do. And you then see the difference in how you're feeling and mind focus and all the other stuff. But I do want to, it's a wide church for it. And what I do is I work with it intuitively. Some people are very rigid about it, in terms of their macros and all the measurements, and they're constantly testing their blood. I respect that. I'm more a guy that sort of, even just yesterday in the supermarket, I've got my little dowsing pendulum. You see, I don't know if book can
all right, yeah.
And so I'm making decisions intuitively with a pendulum, or just the tip of the tongue, and talking to a coach about, should I buy this product or not buy this product? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I do it totally intuitively. So the other thing is you're very fortunate, and you can just go to your doctor, and your doctor says, yeah, we'll get you one of those CAC scans. Might cost you 200 quid. In order to get one with my doctor, I had to go down a big circuitous route. I then got to get all sorts of other things done before eventually getting referred on to the people who might do it for me in London. That was before COVID happened and then stopped.
Yeah.
And I'm not, because we can't travel, so I haven't got up to, Ivor suggested a place in London, North London somewhere. It costs about 150 quid or something. I'm going to get there eventually because I want it done. Because what seems to be the case is that there's no symptoms. For most of the guys that get it done, they go, oh my God, I had no idea. And everybody looking at it, how could you possibly be? And you've always ate that good food. You've always been careful and you've always exercised. And by the way, it was never healthy. And it was, and as you said, you can't exercise your way out of a bad diet. But anyway, and one of the words you've used, and I find inspiring for people is, you get into the low carb thing, you get into the keto thing. And so you're changing your metabolism. We hear from, Ivor, and we hear from Paul Saladino and all the other guys, 2 weeks, you can reverse right out of the damaging reality in your entire system. And then you can start to recover and recover very, very quickly. And so you go into the operation, you come out of the operation, and you know yourself, you're saying it's your metabolism is exactly where it should be to get this. And what's now becoming clear is that even in the UK, they're beginning to admit, you see it's coming into the media, type 2 diabetes. They're now talking about the challenges with dementia and other types of brain type diseases, which we do know now are type 3 diabetes. And if you go back through that to pre-diabetes, you end up with this out of balance metabolism, metabolically completely unwell, but you don't know because you have no symptoms. And so that takes us to COVID, because, you would be one of the guys that one would imagine isolate, don't go out, don't even breathe air, you just stay in the house and lock yourself in. But the truth of the matter is, because you and I and others like us have been exploring the keto thing and listening to podcasts and watching stuff on YouTube and so on, what we're beginning to find is that what you did for your heart is the same sort of stuff you do to maximize your ability to withstand COVID. Have you any views on that? Anything you've listened to or watched or even talked to anyone about that might inspire folks to, take a closer look?
I think absolutely, Jack, and I think the evidence just from the data, and this is it's a very divisive subject at the moment, right? It's very polarizing.
Yeah.
And you need to be careful, right, that you're not alienating people and all that, because, there's no doubting, we'll say that the frontline workers are doing the best job they can. You'd even give the governments credit at the time. They made decisions, right, based on fear and the fact, right, that you had a massive problem coming down the track and all that, right? So allow that, right? But I think the evidence is overwhelming at the moment, right? If you look for it, that COVID, for whatever reason, and forget the fact that I think it's being politically manipulated at the moment, right?
Yeah.
But from a disease and all that, right? Yes, it might have been, I think maybe an extreme form of flu, but it is a flu. And the data will show, right, that the people that are vulnerable are the very elderly with comorbidities, with other illnesses.
Yep.
And we'll come back to metabolic disorder again, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the outliers, the people that have been younger and all that, right, the vast majority of those have they've either had diabetes, they've been obese. And if you remember that interview with that doctor in New York about a month ago, and why wasn't that in mainstream news all over the world, right? He had 24 patients that died the day before.
Yeah.
And he said it astounded him that 23 of them had diabetes.
Yeah.
And he only discovered it by type of an accident, right? So that isn't coincidence.
Yeah.
And I think so exactly the same advice. So of course I was told to go home, isolate, cocooning, make sure you don't have any contact with anybody, your family. Like my kids have been locked up for 10 weeks, right?
Yeah.
My wife can't go to work and everything. Now, it made sense maybe for a month or 2 months, right? Because, you know, you come out of an anesthetic and things, and I buy into that. But it is absolutely absurd, right? To think that the advice would be for somebody either like me or for an elderly person and things like that, that you'll have to isolate yourself for the rest of your life, right? I mean, every single one of us will have to come into contact with that virus at some stage or other.
Yeah.
And I firmly believe, and you know what, time is the only thing that will show that, but I firmly believe, right, that the curve is on the way down. We had 0 deaths here, I think, for the first time yesterday in 2 or 3 months, which is, it's fantastic to see it, right? And it's nice to see a bit of good news and a positive slant and all that. But I think that the stats will show afterwards, right, that maybe the isolation and the whole that, we see why they did it, to stop the ICUs being overrun and all that, right? But I think that you'll have natural herd immunity start to come in. It'll be interesting to see the Swedish data when it's finished. I mean, they didn't do any lockdown. They're in their they're in the mid-European countries for stats and everything at the moment, right? But I suppose from my point of view, right? So I had a consultation with the cardiologist that did the operation a week and a half ago, and I said, okay, what's the story? What's your recommendation? He said, I think, to be honest, you're probably the same risk as you were before the operation. And I said, thank you, because that's my thoughts as well. So I've been in Lidl, I've been shopping, right? I'm staying away from people. I'm not hugging people or stuff like that, right? But I'm not going to stop living and all that, right? Just because I think we have a choice, right? That we live in fear, right? And be manipulated, or have the possibility of being manipulated, or that we look from a positive thing and empowerment and all that. And I know that Ivor is particularly upset at the moment, right? Over, we said, the lockdowns and things like that, right? And you can see where he's coming from and all that. I think there's a positive side to that as well, right? I think that the lockdown has forced all of us to look at things a bit differently.
Indeed.
And you hear people talking and they're saying, Jesus, we get to spend quality time together, right? I think you're going to have it before COVID and after COVID. And I think that hopefully that we learn the lessons from it and we'll take the positives and all that, right? And that hopefully we won't be brainwashed, or hopefully we won't be force-fed vaccines and all that either. I don't think it'll come to that, right? But you could see how it might.
Indeed. I mean, I think for the viewer, when MindStore people, most of it, I reckon, are watching this and have been participating over the weeks in where it's going, and I'm just going with the flow. Coincidence is massive. And so here you have Patrick mention Ivor again. And what you made him, if you rewind, you might remember, he couldn't quite get out the name of the nutritionist. The word nutritionist, when he was telling us his story. And you got to look at that and wonder, why was that not coming out? Because we had to really hear it.
Yes.
We're here, you have to realize that that's not where it's at any longer. And so that's a subconscious message to us all. You have to sense that and go and check that out. However, the big thing is, for God's sake, guys, go and get a hold of Ivor's podcast this very week and listen to that podcast. Really listen to it, and or watch it on YouTube, where you can see the graphs and stuff, because he's still doing the research on all our behalfs. And he is getting upset. And one of the things he poses is, why aren't the journalists, why aren't they, especially the politicians who say they're really interested in saving lives, why are they not looking at the science? Why never really tell us the true scientific figures? Why don't we get the real data? And you will find sneakily, almost pathetic journalists having a good old slag at Sweden. Never digging deeper into the actual figures. Yes, they've got slightly more than, they're much less than us in UK, but they've got more than, say, Denmark or whatever. What they're not telling you is the vast majority of deaths are in old people's homes.
Absolutely.
Who are predetermined with their metabolisms.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you that. So, and and I've just witnessed, and you've just witnessed the last few days, so-called journalists, and it doesn't matter your view on it, your view doesn't matter. A massive squirrel in this country running around, and journalists getting all upset, and for the first time ever actually asking someone a question properly, but nevertheless running about chasing something that in the scheme of things doesn't matter. What matters is, why not asking the questions about the data? Why aren't they begging to differ, like we heard from Lothar, and dig in the way that Paul Saladino, you might not like him because he's into the meat thing, but certainly Ivor, for God's sake, read his book, go and watch that. Educate yourself, understand what we're talking about, go and find out about metabolic health. Find out about the impact of insulin. Find out about these things. Find out why is green drinks absolutely, why would you absolutely put that into your system? You need to find out why. I'm getting passionate about this, and why you can sense that Patrick's passionate about it. Look what happened to Patrick. Perfectly healthy looking guy, running a successful business, etc. And yet it was just a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
Ticking time bomb.
No, absolutely. I'm so passionate as well, right? And there's so many guys there, right? I mean, Paul Mason has been interviewed by Ivor. He's been interviewed by Paul Saladino and all the other guys as well. He's fantastic. And there's no conspiracy theory or anything. He just gives it straight from data. And for me, right, if the nutrition, because let's face it, we go in because we're conditioned that way from the time we're kids and all that the doctors and all that, like that, that they're figures of authority and we listen to them, and it's very difficult when you get a challenging diagnosis. Not to listen to the people, right, that you put your trust in traditionally. And it takes a lot of courage to step back and say, okay, at least let me educate myself. And if I could recommend,
that's it.
Yeah, if I could recommend anything on the nutrition, listen to that. It's episode number 32 with Paul Saladino and Gary Fetke. It is great entertainment apart from anything else, right? Yeah. But man, does it lay out what's actually happening worldwide with nutrition and all that?
Absolutely. The whole story about cornflakes, oh my God. Oh my God, what an embarrassment. What I find also is, I often joke about scientists catching up, but some scientists should be ashamed of themselves. When you read this stuff, you go, what are you doing? But anyway, listen, we can go on all night, but the hours flashed by like inevitably it has. Yeah. I'm really grateful, Patrick, for you sharing. Your care. Everybody listening can sense you really you care for the rest of the MindStore people out there, because who would have thought it would have happened to you, for God's sake? But
I absolutely, Jack. And if only one person goes away and listen to it, just educate yourself. You're not committing to anything and all that, right? And make your own mind up, which is what you've been saying all the time. Like you said, you've never pushed it. And again, thank you for having me on here. It's been a privilege, and if it makes a difference or whatever, I'm absolutely delighted to being able to come on with you. And if it makes a difference or whatever, great.
Yeah. Okay, Patrick, I can't thank you enough. We're now going to go into something special, as we all know. But again, Patrick, you're a star. Love you to bits. I'm really grateful, and I'm sure everybody is going to be so excited. I can't wait to see all the comments. It's going to be amazing. So
no, I can't wait for what you're going to do. What you're going to do next Friday now, right? I'm really looking forward to that.
Excellent.
So
okay. Cheers, Patrick. I'll just turn off now. Okay.
All right.